What if the world ended once, not in myth, not in scripture, but in a moment so violent that the sky itself collapsed? A day when light died, a day when the air turned to ash, a day when early humans looked up and saw the sun vanish, as if someone had closed a door on creation. They did not know it then, but the next few years would decide whether our species would endure or become just another forgotten branch in the fossil record. And the real mystery is this: why did we survive when so many others didn't? 74,000 years ago, the earth opened beneath Lake Toba with a force no human eye had ever witnessed. The explosion was not a sound. It was a rupture, a deep, continental tearing, as if the planet's crust had exhaled in fury. A wound the size of a small nation burst upward into the sky, hurling fire, ash, and shattered stone in a violent arc that rewrote the horizon. A column of incandescent ash shot nearly 50 kilometers into the air, white-hot at its blazing center, dark as an eclipse at its widening crown. Even the clouds above seemed to shrink away from it. Within minutes, daylight faltered, shadows thickened, animals froze mid-stride, confused by a sun that dimmed too quickly. And within a few short hours, the light simply disappeared. The world slipped into a dusk that did not belong to any season. Ash began to fall, not like snow, but like the slow settling of a dying planet. Grains of glass, sharp dust, drifted across continents, riding winds older than memory, winds that carried the signature of catastrophe. From Africa to Australia, the sky transformed into a ceiling of smoke, layered and suffocating, reflecting nothing, revealing nothing. For early humans, scattered across the land, nightfall no longer announced itself. It did not arrive with the softness of evening. It dropped like a curtain, sudden, absolute, turning familiar landscapes into silent silhouettes. What had once been day became an endless grey twilight, a new shape of the world that offered no sunrise and no promise of warmth. Families huddled near fires that flickered beneath a sky that no longer responded to them. Hunters returned early, disoriented by a horizon that refused to glow. Mothers soothed their children under a darkness that felt too heavy to explain. Nobody understood what had happened, but they all felt the same instinctive truth, that something colossal had shifted, and the world they knew was gone. The eruption of Toba was not merely an event, it was a boundary, a moment when the earth redrew the line between life and extinction. The ash didn't just fall, it changed the rules of sunlight itself. Each grain, tiny, sharp, volcanic glass, drifted into the upper atmosphere and formed a vast reflective shield around the planet. When sunlight struck that cloud, it didn't warm the earth. It ricocheted back into space, as if the world had been wrapped in a dark, metallic veil. The cooling was immediate, not subtle, not seasonal, but a rapid collapse of warmth. 10, 12, then 15 degrees Celsius, lost to the sky. Plants blackened in the dim light, their leaves turning brittle, their stems collapsing. Under frost they were never meant to endure. Forests folded in slow motion, their canopies sagging as cold pressed down from above, and ash smothered their roots below. Grasslands stiffened into grey carpets, crunching under the slightest weight, brittle as ancient parchment, left too long in winter air. Animals starved where they stood. Herds that once thundered across the plains grew thin, quiet, skeletal. Predators prowled longer, but found nothing left to hunt. River systems shrank into narrow threads of sluggish, ash-laden water. Some disappeared completely, leaving behind cracked beds that no migration route could cross again. Patterns older than humanity, the seasonal rise and fall of herds, the pulse of ecosystems, simply stopped. The Ice Age arrived early, not by the slow choreography of orbital cycles, but by catastrophe. A sudden, global recoil into cold and scarcity, and through it all, ash continued to drift downward, fine as dust, relentless as time. Somewhere in this swirling grey world, small human groups huddled for warmth, their fires flickering against winds that refused to soften. They wrapped themselves in hides that no longer held back the cold. They scavenged among dying landscapes for roots, seeds, anything at all. They watched familiar paths vanish into darkness and drifting ash. And though they did not know the cause, they understood the truth. The earth had changed shape beneath their feet. The world they inherited was colder, harsher, and utterly unfamiliar. But still, in scattered pockets across the land, they endured, trying to outlast a winter that seemed to have no end. Humanity shrank, not in myth, not in poetry, but in the cold arithmetic of survival. Entire branches of our species tree ended quietly, like flames smothered under ash, their last sparks fading before anyone could carry them forward. Homo sapiens, once spread across Africa's savannas and into the fringes of the Near East, may have dwindled to only 2,000, 5,000 living souls, a number so small that every survivor today could fit inside a single modern sports arena. One circle of fragile, frightened families holding on in the dark. Neanderthal groups fared little better. Once confident hunters of Ice Age Europe, they fractured into isolated pockets, trapped between frozen plains and collapsing ecosystems. Valleys that once guided herds became dead ends. Glacial winds carved borders that no clan could cross. The Denisovans, the mysterious people of the eastern mountains, lost entire branches of their population. Some vanished completely, leaving only faint echoes in our DNA, genetic shadows, soft enough to miss, but deep enough to matter. Across continents, the great tapestry of human relatives began to thin, not through conflict or conquest or dramatic endings, but through a slow, suffocating erasure, a steady loss of breath in a world that had turned against them. For tens of thousands of years, the question of who would inherit tomorrow hung by a single trembling thread, and that thread tightened with every failed hunt, every frozen river, every child lost to hunger or cold. Survival wasn't strength. Strength meant nothing against winters that crushed forests and oceans that forgot how to breathe. Survival wasn't intelligence. Knowledge could not summon warmth or bring the sun back through ash. Survival wasn't destiny. Destiny has never saved a species. Only effort and luck and the stubborn heartbeat of those who keep going. What kept our ancestors alive was quieter than heroism and older than language. It was the simple, relentless refusal to disappear. Families huddled together in makeshift shelters of hide and stone, sharing the last scraps of warmth. Mothers passed knowledge to daughters. Fathers taught sons where roots might still grow. Elders whispered stories to remind the young that the world had once been brighter and could be again. In this long, dim chapter of human history, our species did not thrive. It endured. It persisted in scattered embers, small clusters of people hidden across a wounded planet, each one carrying the fragile possibility of a future they would never see. And from those few embers, the fire of humanity slowly began to gather again. But not all hope froze. Even in an age carved from ash and ice, the earth kept a few quiet refuges, warm enough, protected enough, lucky enough for human life to continue its fragile flicker. Here and there, across the map of deep time, small pockets of survivable land remained. Today, scientists call them refugia, the last safe harbors in a world collapsing into winter. Coastal Africa, where warm currents brushed the shore and the sea still remembered how to give. Hidden valleys, sheltered by stone ridges that blocked the worst of the wind. Rivers protected by cliffs, and deep bends where ice struggled to take hold and fresh water continued its ancient pulse. In these fragile sanctuaries, people adapted, not with grand inventions, but with subtle, brilliant shifts. Born from necessity, tools became smaller, sharper, more efficient. Tiny, microlithic blades, crafted from stone flakes, designed for a world where nothing could be wasted. They were easy to carry, easy to replace, perfect for hunters who needed mobility more than strength. Along rocky shores, families foraged for food the Ice Age could never fully erase. Shellfish tucked inside tidal pools, seaweed clinging to cold stone, crabs scuttling beneath the surf. These resources became lifelines, steady and dependable, in a world where large game had vanished into memory. Inside their shelters, families tightened. Fear did that, but so did love. Children slept between parents to share warmth. Elders taught younger hands how to spark fire from stone, how to track tiny footprints in frozen sand, how to listen for the faint crack of thin ice beneath a river's surface. Tribes wove closer. Cooperation was no longer optional. It was the only path forward. A shared kill, a shared shelter, a shared story could mean the difference between surviving the night or becoming part of the quiet landscape. Knowledge passed faster than ever before, because forgetting no longer meant inconvenience. It meant death. This was the crucible in which humanity's identity strengthened, the instinct to gather, to share, to protect the young, to plan beyond tomorrow. Even when tomorrow was uncertain, humanity did not survive alone. Humanity could not survive alone. It survived because hands reached outward, because voices whispered warnings in the dark, because small bands of people chose again and again to face the cold as one. And in those dim corners of the world, where warmth lingered like a memory, the future of our species took its first quiet, shivering breaths. When the ash finally settled, when the long winter loosened its grip, the survivors stepped into a planet rewritten by silence. The world they re-entered was not the world their parents remembered. The forests that returned were thinner, younger, tentative, as if the earth itself was learning to breathe again. The rivers that thawed carved new paths through the land, meandering through valleys, reshaped by ice and time. But the greatest change was not in the landscapes that healed. It was in the people who walked back into them. Something in humanity had been altered, not in bone, not in muscle, but in mind and memory. Every human alive today carries the mark of the Toba bottleneck, a narrowing so severe that it binds all 8 billion of us. to the same fragile handful of ancestors who kept their fires burning when the sky refused to. Their endurance left fingerprints across our DNA, but also across the deeper parts of us, the parts that can't be measured by genetics alone. From them, we inherited a heightened sense of cooperation, the instinct to gather close, not just for warmth, but for meaning. We inherited the ability to imagine what does not yet exist, to hope for what we cannot see, to keep walking, even when the horizon has gone dark. Their world collapsed, but their minds expanded, and that expansion, born of necessity, forged in scarcity, honed in fear, became the quiet engine that carried humanity forward into art, into culture, into language, into the long arc of everything that followed. And their story, your story, is still unfolding. Here on Prehistoric Shadows, we follow the traces left in ash and ice, the subtle shifts in deep time where catastrophe reshaped us more profoundly than comfort ever could. These are the turning points that rarely appear in textbooks but linger in our blood, echoes of a past so ancient it can only be told in whispers. Walk with me into the next shadow of deep time, into the next unanswered question, buried beneath stone or frozen beneath millennia of silence. There are still secrets waiting in the world's oldest quiet, secrets about who we were and who we might yet become, because sometimes the future does not begin with triumph or certainty, but with the smallest flame that refuses to die.